Hello and welcome to today's episode of Health University, where today I have the pleasure of connecting with my friend and colleague, Dr. Betty Murray. Betty is a women's health advocate, fierce women's health advocate, nutrition expert, a PhD researcher, a certified functional medicine provider, an author, and a speaker. And if that's not all, Betty has made several key discoveries in her work in her research for her PhD that help identify and unravel and rectify women's hormonal imbalances. And if I've got any of that wrong, I'm going to give you a chance to correct me, Betty. She's the founder and CEO of the Living Well Dallas Functional Medicine Center and Minerva, a femtech startup that is just about to be launched. Is that correct?
Yes,
Which helps identify, it's a national telemedicine platform that is all about hormones and helping to identify and rectify hormone imbalances. She's featured for Brains magazine and has been featured for Grazia magazine. She's frequently featured as a nutrition expert on Fox News broadcasting, NBC, and CBS. Did I miss anything, Betty?
no, you got it.
Okay, excellent. Well, today we're going to be talking about metabolism, hormones, and sex hormones, which is your area of expertise. So this listening audience is tending toward struggling with fertility. Many are in this fine time in life where it's fertility and then future forward, also a pre-perimenopause. They're in their late 30s to early 40s. And as we know, that can be up to a 10-year spectrum of time. So what would you say to women who are trying to become pregnant about making sure that they understand and can take care of their fertile health and their metabolic health?
Yeah, so I would say probably first and foremost, the two are intertwined. You can't look at, and I would say there's a lot of things that I think are wrong with our westernized conventional medicine system. And I think a lot of it is the siloing of health concerns. We look at metabolism as this sort of, where actually even your primary care don't really look at metabolism. They're looking at pathology. When you get labs done, they're looking to see, are you diseased? But they never ever look at, are you healthy metabolically? And I can explain that.
I
But
would like you to.
yeah, if you're not healthy metabolically, fertility will be impacted because those systems are intertwined intimately. And I think a lot of women struggle. And if they don't go to somebody like yourself that's doing a much deeper dive into the root cause, they end up automatically getting thrown into sort of a fertility drug cascade that oftentimes I believe really is unnecessary if we took a step back. That's the first thing is understanding they're not separate. They are 100% intertwined.
It's a symphony.
It is.
And if one instrument is out of alignment, it's going to affect the entire organization of communication.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I also like to say that while we use the term infertility, that is a medical diagnosis so that there can be an ICD-10 code so that someone can be paid by insurance. But in fact, while the statistic is that 1 in 5 are struggling with infertility, I think that you would agree, we would argue that we're struggling with subfertility or subclinical fertility, that a very small percentage of the population actually has infertility where either egg can't meet sperm or there's a structural impediment. And this is where your conversation in gut health, metabolic health, and hormonal health is, I think, going to be so helpful to the listeners to understand that infertility is simply, it's over there in the insurance world.
Yeah, I'm glad you actually clarified that because I've over the last 2 decades have heard so many people saying they've been labeled with that. The reality is all these things that we throw around are labels for insurance purposes. But truly, there are very few things that are true signs of absolute infertility. And it is often just sub problems that need to be rectified. And we just conventionally don't do that. And so I agree. And I thank you for clarification because you're right. It's not that cut and dry.
Yeah. So how would you advise someone to begin? Because since now we know and we are in agreement that there is a symphony that can become a cacophony, where does one begin when there is an imbalance? How would you advise someone begin to investigate and rectify some of these?
Yeah. So whether it's someone who has gone through maybe a little bit of a deeper dive in, let's say, laboratory data. I don't know about you, but I've had a lot of people come in and say, oh, they had AMH tested or they've been told some POI, whatever their label is, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think the first thing you want to do is when you're looking at root cause is you want to step down and go, in the factors, I think of these as cornerstones of our health. In the cornerstones of our health, am I eating the absolute cleanest, healthiest diet I can? Not to say that you can't on occasion go out and have a dessert or something like that, but am I eating clean? And we can dive into that. Am I doing the right thing by giving my body the absolute best possible fuel? And then we can always look at what that best possible fuel is and then go from there. The next thing is, am I protecting and preserving high quality sleep? Because anytime I'm not sleeping well, I'm going to change my hormonal cascade.
Mm-hmm.
And from an exercise standpoint, am I doing appropriate restorative, rehabilitative in many cases exercise, or am I overdoing it?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then I look at the other factors of like my stress, mindset, and all those other pieces. You have to start at those cornerstones. My team and I, we do a lot of really intricate testing and a lot of things to deeper dive into the biochemistry. But no matter how many supplements, other things you take, if you don't get the cornerstones right, those are expensive. And I believe me, I, as a biochemistry person and major, I was always looking for how can I deliver this in a way so I don't have to sleep as much? How can I make it easier? And I'm like, I've done this for 20 years. You have to do those cornerstones.
Absolutely.
And so when you're looking at your fertility journey, the first place to start is at the cornerstones. It is hands down. You have to get your hands dirty in those areas.
Mm-hmm. Hands in the soil to plant the seed, right?
Yes.
Uh-huh. And so you did suggest that you could drill down. And again, I love to have listeners be able to take away, well, what does that mean? What should I and what shouldn't I eat? And we know what we shouldn't eat, but sometimes do it anyway. So what should I be eating if I were to just simplify?
Yeah. So I'll give you a little bit of the science and I'll tell you why I say eat what I want you to eat. So we know that when our powerhouses in our cells, called your mitochondria. So our powerhouses in the cells are the engine that are predominant power plants to burn our fuel, either sugar or fat.
Mm-hmm.
And when they are running optimally, you get a lot of energy production. So that energy might be what helps you work out. It might be help you what to think, but it also powers your cells of fertility, your ovaries.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
Mm-hmm.
yep, the follicles, all of that. So the powerhouse of mitochondria is intimately tied to follicle function.
Mm-hmm.
And when you aren't eating well, the powerhouse doesn't function properly. And then you get other signs of aging. So one of the more common things we see clinically is we'll see maybe you're starting to
Hold on one second there, Betty. You just froze.
often
You
a
just
change.
You just froze. I'm going to ask you to go back so they can cut that. So you
Okay.
froze. You froze, and I've got all my bars. Are you doing okay there?
Yeah, I've got a mind. Yeah. Let's
Okay.
see.
All
Oh,
right.
just
Yeah.
who knows?
So yeah. So you were talking about the power, the mitochondria, the powerhouse.
Yep.
Okay.
So, oh, nope. Cancel. Let me see. There we go. Let me see. Let me see. I'm going to close this just in case this is doing it. Sorry.
It's okay. And the team will edit and splice together, so it is seamless. I just didn't want to miss an important
Yeah.
piece
Just
of
make
education.
sure that there was nothing running in the background.
Okay.
Okay. So, yeah. So you want me to start all the way back at mitochondria?
Sure.
Okay. I'll start back at that. So the mitochondria are our powerhouses in the cells, and they're in every single cell, right? For the most part, they're in
Mhm.
every single cell, and they're responsible for your actual metabolism. So the burning of sugar, the burning of fat predominantly. And it is the function of those organelles in your body to generate energy and also stimulate activity. So stimulating the follicle cycle.
Mhm.
And when we see changes to those powerhouses, and that could be changes in actual energy production because we become, let's say, more insulin resistant,
Mm.
where our diet is not matching our energy expenditure and we have too much sugar available to the cell, and the cell doesn't need it anymore and it can't take any more in. Just think of it as like the powerhouse is already full of fuel waiting, and we keep trying to shove it inside. That no longer works. And we become resistant to the messenger or the doorman that's pushing it through the door. Anything that disables a piece of that activity or slows it down can affect our fertility journey. So when I think about the dietary activities, the first thing I think about is how efficient am I at making my body have the most efficient powerhouses. So when I'm looking at dietary intake, what that often means is I want to stay away from things that might create a lot of additional fuel out in the bloodstream that the doorman, insulin, is going to have to push into the cell constantly. So what that means is things like ultra processed foods, added sugars, liquid calories like sodas and things like that. And it can even be, you might be eating what sounds like health food. We get trapped by marketing all the time, and we hear things like, oh, this is made with whole grains, whole. There's some marketing splash across the packaging. And anything that has been altered by man has been processed in some way. So the easy thing to think about it is I don't see toast growing on the side of the road. I also don't see pasta growing on the side.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's so if we think about, we want to eat it as close to the way nature created it.
Yeah.
And what that means is it's leaving the food intact, the nutrient intact, and particularly from a carbohydrate standpoint, it's leaving the fiber intact. And when I have a lot of dietary fiber naturally found in foods, it actually contains that carbohydrate, the sugar component of that food, and drags it deep into the colon so your microbiome get it. And that feeds your microbiome, which makes you healthier, but it also lowers the impact to your blood sugar. So there's a lot of women walking around that may be struggling with different forms of imbalanced or subfertility, and it's because their body isn't very efficient with the sugar metabolism anymore. And it really doesn't. I think people think it's got to be extraordinary, like this extraordinary dietary change.
Yeah.
And it doesn't.
It's actually just getting back to nature. I'll often say, if you can pick it from a tree, pull it from the ground, maybe pull the egg out from the chicken's bottom or the chicken itself, that's whole food. And otherwise, you're having processed food. If you can't identify where it came from, if you have to read ingredients on the label, that's not whole food. And as you say, we're designed to detox some of this, but when it is insult after insult, that's when the body says, okay, I can't do this anymore, and insulin becomes resistant. Yeah.
And I think so that's the carbohydrate content. Then when we have, as a nutrition professional in the industry, I think these people, I'm going to be a little bit inflammatory here, but I'm doing it intentionally, is we almost feel dietary schizophrenia. I'm going to be this today, I'm going to be this tomorrow, I'm going to be this the next day. Especially as somebody who's gone through school multiple times, you get this like constant barrage of, I need to change my diet to this other extreme.
Right. I'll be plant-based, I'll be
but the
keto.
reality is, yeah, but the reality is if you look at all of these dietary recommendations in general, and you don't look for what defines the differences between them, but what is consistent between almost all of them. There's some extreme ones like carnivore that might be a little bit different. But honestly, if you look at all of them, they're all going to say vegetables are good for you. Whole fruits with the fiber still intact, not juiced, are good for you. Nuts and seeds, maybe if you're looking at autoimmune things, that's a whole nother thing. But we're looking at these whole food based, and that alleviates a lot of the confusion around carbohydrates. Don't look for removal. I actually look for what can I include that is a healthier food. And I think one of the other major areas, because I hear it both in my 30-something women up to my 70-something women, is often we aren't really necessarily a big protein eater.
Yeah.
So,
yes. We're so busy intermittent fasting, which is, I have no problem with that. But then then we're beginning our breakfast where we're not wanting to eat, protein rich foods at breakfast. So we begin at a deficit with our first meal.
Exactly. So protein and fats are the only essential macronutrients. So that means you must consume them. You cannot skip them. You will not survive very long. Carbohydrates, we can actually survive without. Now, I don't think that's a positive way just because we can survive it doesn't mean we should, but that means we need to eat protein. And if we eat protein starting at that first meal that breaks the fast, we actually get blood control, which means that we have more stable blood sugar, not too many little insulin doormen to push the sugar into the cell. So we get better overall metabolic control. And so I think that's very important. And actually, the protein that ends the day is also really vital in your body's ability to build muscle and other things. And I think it's also understanding that we probably need no less than 90 grams and probably closer to 100 to 120 grams on average for most women, and men obviously a little bit more, which seems like quite a bit, especially like you said, if you're intermittent fasting and you're doing it every day.
Right. But there are ways to get it. If intermittent fasting is your thing, I don't want to have an argument, an arm wrestle around that, but then you're probably the person who needs her protein with a protein shake snack kind of thing in order to make sure that you're getting those levels up. Would you agree? I know that kind of maybe falls a little bit out
I
of
would
alignment
actually
with
say
eating the whole foods, but it's a way to get the protein back into the body.
yes, I would say most of the women and men that I've worked with at some point, at least several times a week, are doing a protein shake just to achieve that protein meal because it does give you a quick, easy to make. A lot of times, I actually, Susan, have them eat it with their meal.
Yeah, exactly. I'll do the same. You don't have to have that 24 ounce. You can just have an 8-ounce glass of your beverage with your water and then have that be your protein shake. And then you've doubled your protein intake for the day, and it's easy to digest. And so, yeah, it's a really easy way to fix this seemingly insurmountable amount of protein to get each day.
Yeah, and I want to step onto
Yeah.
the intermittent fasting conversation because I've done quite a bit of research in looking at the studies and looking at the impact between women and men and in age groups. Because often these studies get talked about in the media and they just gloss over what the data really say. And they don't go down to the nuances of how did women in their 30s and 40s react compared to the men, and then even women in like my age group in their 50s, how did they react? And what the data really show is that the idea of 16 hours of fasting, which is very popular right now, and 8-hour eating windows is not that effective in women, and especially women that are working on their fertility journey, and especially women in their 40s and 50s going through menopause. And it's because there's a hormonal effect that men do not experience. And it's because when we skip meals and we go too long without eating, our stress chemistry, cortisol, which is responsible for stress, it rises. And essentially what happens is the pituitary and the hypothalamus in the brain, so think of it as the director and the conductor, they get together and they start talking about what they think is going on, and they take in all this information and they decide, hey, we have this going on every day. You know what? We don't need to worry about my fertility journey. I need to respond to stress. And so your body preferentially makes more cortisol and shortchanges the production of progesterone. It's not because it's getting stolen, it's because the controllers in the brain are doing that. So I run into it a lot where people maybe started doing that and they're like, okay, I can get more done in the morning, or maybe I lost a few pounds, but they don't realize that it's leading to these metabolic things that are counterproductive to what they truly want, which might be their fertility journey.
Exactly, especially for the fertility. Yeah, I trip over my tongue all the time around this conversation of intermittent fasting because as a Chinese medicine practitioner, that is not advised. It is advised to have 3 meals evenly spaced a day. Snacking if you need it for blood sugar stability, but really we shouldn't need it if we're eating properly with those 3 meals. And yet here in the San Francisco Bay Area, and probably the same is true in your cosmopolitan areas, there's such a bandwagon that these women have hopped on. And so it can sometimes be stressful to have that conversation. So I'm grateful to be able to lean back and rely on Chinese medicine to say, this has been going on for 5,000 years. It may be wise to take a look at this.
Yeah. And I don't know if you found this, but I found if somebody wants to do it, we do more like your 5-2 fasting. where you might fast 2 days. The rest of the time you eat a normal meal. You have normal 5 days out of the week, you eat breakfast, lunch, dinner. You still get some benefits. You get all the cellular benefits, but you don't see this.
Oopsies, you froze again, Betty. Sorry. I'm going to pause.
Okay. So I have found doing what's often called 5-2 fasting or alternate day fasting helps accommodate somebody who really wants to have a fasting regimen for some of the benefits, but helps reduce the impact on stress chemistry. So what that means is they might do 2, maybe 3 times a week. They might do the 16 hours of fasting and crunch into that early afternoon, but they actually eat 3 full meals a day the other days. And they just find that the metabolic function is better overall.
Yeah. And when you speak about the metabolic function and how it manifests for the fertility, I've shared this on other episodes, but I was so surprised to see what in a presentation that was being done by a reproductive endocrinologist, just how much of the debris actually then exists in the follicular fluid of this egg trying to grow. So the inflammatory markers, the cytokines, the sugars, all of these are elevated because the body itself is not being properly managed and metabolized. So I think here again, particularly for the person going through a fertility struggle, the imperative really is there to feed every cell and tissue. And the only way to feed every cell and tissue is to feed them.
Yes, you're absolutely right.
We talk about sex hormones being less important if the body is perceiving that we're in stress. What is there a Cliff's Notes version that you would describe as the mechanisms that occur that is causing this woman to be metabolically dysregulated so that she can really get the importance of why it matters that her metabolism and her microbiome, I do want to circle back to the microbiome as the master conductor, like why are these things important and not just her AMH and FSH and progesterone, all of the sex hormones being tested?
Yeah, I think a visual that I like to consider is we talked a little bit about the symphony. All your hormones are a symphony. And we've got our conductor, which is the hypothalamus, or I'm sorry, let me say it this way. The director is the hypothalamus and the pituitary is the conductor. So it's talking directly to each little branch of the orchestra. And I consider the stress chemistry the percussion because the percussion really sets like the tone, the speed. And your sex hormones, let's say, are your wind instruments, your metabolic hormones like insulin and glucagon. They are the brass section. And so if your orchestra shows up to play a waltz and all of a sudden the percussion system is playing a scat jazz tune, right? Because you're living your life really stressed out, all of the other parts of that orchestra are going to try and bring harmony. And we tend to look at these markers like AMH and this and that, and we're looking at these finite experiences that our body is doing in a particular space and time, but we need to blow out and go, what's the whole system seeing? And the truth is, the entire body, and particularly the controllers in the brain, are looking for, am I safe? Is there nourishment enough for my body to be able to procreate, carry a growing fetus, and have it survive for the next 18 years? Right?
At least the next year with my breast, but yes, the next 18 years.
And so we have to think about these things are all tied together. And so no matter what you're doing, you got to recognize that when the body isn't showing up with the right chemistry, right? Whatever that chemistry might be, lower progesterone levels, AMH levels that are off.
PCOS.
It's not your PCOS. It's not your body fighting against you. It's not your body going, ha, I'm going to mess with you today. It's because those are indicative of how your body thinks it's trying to bring balance, known as homeostasis. It's really trying to bring balance. And so if I've been labeled with any of those things, I need to step back and look at what areas can I address this? Because almost always it's going to be in the stress, the eating, the exercise, mindset, sleep, All those
Mhm.
things play a role.
Absolutely. We hear these diagnoses and we think that they are the cause of our infertility. They are the effect of our dysregulation. So we just got to take it from a higher elevation and take a look and say, why PCOS? Why POI? Why endo? And then where can we insert changes that will affect what caused the diagnosis to become apparent in the first place? Thank you for listening to this episode of Health University. We always strive to find ways to improve our support of you. Please connect with us for a fertility assessment call at the link below, healthuniversity.co, note not .com, /your-fertile-health-call. We'd love to learn a bit about you and share our resources. Now, let's resume our conversation in today's episode.
Exactly.
Yeah. When you talk about hormone metabolism, this is a liver function is what I think of. So could you teach us a little bit about hormone metabolism?
Yep. So we're going to stick to the sex hormones because this is predominantly where our discussion goes. So we have three dominant hormone categories. We have progesterone, which is responsible for progest, that's preparing the uterine lining for implantation and growing a fetus. We have estrogen that breaks down to three different estrogens, the most important being estradiol, which is the one that your ovaries produce. And then we have testosterone, which is actually the precursor to our estrogens that actually gets made through an enzyme into estrogen. When we look at these sex hormones, it's not even just what your body's making, right? So the ovaries make estrogen and progesterone, and testosterone is made there as well. Yeah, a little bit of testosterone, but our fat cells also make estrogen, and we have testosterone there too. So a lot of times, if I'm gaining body fat for whatever reason, I may have a scenario where I now have more estrogen on board because my fat cells are now making estrogen, which is very common in PCOS, which is a metabolic issue first and foremost. So it's not just about the estrogen that your ovaries are making or progesterone. It is about the total body load of hormones. So where they're getting made in the body. And then we have to remember that up until really the Industrial Revolution, so we're talking less than 200 years ago, almost everything in our environment was 100% organic. And we had Industrial Revolution, and now we've got 100,000 different chemicals that we've added to our environment and food, many and most of which look like hormones to our bodies. And so we have also this exterior load of things that we're coming in contact with that our body has to deal with. And ultimately, it all goes to the liver and goes through this like multi-stage process to be wrapped up and prepared for deletion and removal. When I first went to school, one of the many times I went to school, and I was in class and we were talking about liver function, I thought of detoxification or biotransformation like I have a broken chair and I'm going to throw it in the dumpster and it doesn't quite fit. So I need to break the other legs off of it so I can shove it in the dumpster. And that's how I thought of our liver working. And that's actually not what it does. What it does is say, I got to wrap different wrappers at different stages around this toxin. And I have to wrap it in perfect order to then get it to the trash to get out. And that means it's got to go out through the urine or it's got to go out through the stool where there's interactions with the microbes. And so depending on how we're wired genetically, so some of us might wrap our estrogens up really easily and take them to the dumpster very efficiently. Other of us may not. I happen to be one of those genetically. I was not efficient here. So I didn't feel good on birth control pills. I didn't do well. My perimenopause was very unpleasant because I just wasn't good at that, right? So some of us may be better than others. Our diet plays into how well we package those. And so when things are in the liver, they have to go through those steps. And I think a lot of women get stuck in this scenario where they're having a lot of symptoms that they might label as a code, but it truly is that the body is struggling to get rid of those toxins. And if I'm getting more exposure to those, I'm just loading up the system with more and more things it needs to get to the trash.
Yep. Yep. And so that's where you see things like when someone will say, well, you're estrogen dominant. It does not mean that your ovaries are producing more estrogen. It means you're not clearing these estrogens that ideally should have been used once, processed through the liver, and then pooped on out. So, and
Yes.
if they don't, then they're going to recirculate in the bloodstream, almost like a facade of a hormone. So the body behaves as though it's got more of these hormones, and then the organs will not be producing as they ought to because they're seeing this recirculation of estrogen. Does that sound like a
Yes.
lay person's way of describing it?
Yeah, I like to think of it as your hormones are keys. And so for instance, estrogen, there's a receptor for estrogen on everything but two cells in the body.
Mm-hmm.
Red blood cells and one type of brain cell. So every cell in your body has a keyhole for the estrogen key. When you have a estrogen compound that was slated to go out for the trash that doesn't get all the way to the dumpster for whatever reason, constipation, gut
Mm-hmm.
microbiome, all those things, it gets recirculated. And so now it's like a key that has been bent a little bit. Have you ever
Mm-hmm.
done that? And you bent your key and you put it in the lock and you keep trying the key and it doesn't really work and you jiggle it and finally you get it, but you're like, okay, I'm going to break this key. That's essentially
Or the
what
door.
happens. But basically what happens is that half used up, half detoxified estrogen occupies the receptor that your natural estrogen should sit in, your key.
Mm-hmm.
And it disrupts the body. And we only have a cursory understanding of what that impact really is, but we know it has impact on fertility and lots of other health.
We see some of the downstream effects. We don't necessarily know every step in the mechanism of action, but we see the results.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So
Absolutely.
how does one improve her liver function to make that detoxification, wrapping and hauling to the trash more effective and efficient?
Yeah, this is, I think, one of the most fascinating and exciting parts of what I do is number one, I don't always think it's utilitarian to find out something if it doesn't give us direction. Like doing testing, but it's not going to give you direction isn't really helpful. But these pathways, these sort of packaging processes that your body has are very impacted by what we eat. So almost all of us have heard that broccoli or broccoli sprouts or Brussels sprouts are cancer protective.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why we refer to it is they actually have compounds in them, one called sulforaphane or indole 3-carbinol or DIM,
Mm-hmm.
and they actually help us push our estrogen compounds and all the what they call xenoestrogens, the sort of synthetic estrogens,
Mm-hmm.
into a clean pathway. Think of it as they're getting wrapped in green tissue paper so they can then get passed to the next step. So how we eat can impact these. So eating foods that are high in the brassica family, kale, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, cauliflower, rosemary is actually a nutrient that is very helpful. Berries, actually caffeine, not something I would do when I'm pregnant, but caffeine actually has a little bit of this impact. Green tea, EGCG, and even things like curcumin or turmeric, right?
Yeah.
Turmeric is a fabulous anti-inflammatory, but it also helps you push estrogen compounds out of the most toxic pathway that our body can produce.
Mm-hmm.
So cleaning up your diet, eating a lot of nutrient rich, what we would call flavonoid rich spices, which I love Chinese medicine because it's all about not only making tea,
colors and
foods and spices. The spices are actually helpful here. Eating those foods actually helps your body get these hormones out, getting adequate B vitamins. Once we get the right wrapper on it, like the green wrapper, it gets passed to another gene that needs to wrap a pink wrapper around it. And it's tied to your folate, which is your green leafy vegetables, and B12, which we find in red meat, right? So having enough of those nutrients makes a difference. And I would say a big part of this too is finding ways to reduce our exposure to these chemical estrogens.
Yeah.
The reality is you can't get them 100% out. We can do the best we can because that stresses people out. They're
Right.
like, we do. I'm like, okay, we do the best we can. We drink out of glass or stainless steel. We get rid of water bottles. We remove BPA, which is found in plastics. We get rid of.
We don't take that receipt at the checkout counter that is coated with BPA, and then it's all over our fingers, and then we scratch our nose or scratch our eyes, and we've just given it a free passage into our bloodstream.
Exactly. Or looking at the home cleaning products and the body care products. I just tell people, I'm like, okay, what we do is every time I buy something new, the next time I replace it with something cleaner, a cleaner, greener, because you can slowly do that over time. And you're never going to remove all of it, but our job is to remove the majority of the load. And then your body isn't as burdened anymore to get rid of it.
Exactly. Fragrance is another one, by the way. And that's just everywhere. So it's really challenging, but do your best to use fragrance-free products because you don't need to smell like a lavender field. And the likelihood is that lavender is not really an essential oil from an organic lavender field. It's a synthetic from a plant, from a lab, and you're just inhaling all of this additional synthetics.
Absolutely. What's funny is I'm actually allergic to real lavender.
Oh, interesting.
I can tell you if it's in there or not, because obviously I break out in hives. So I'm
Oh,
like, nope,
wow.
that's still nasty. It's nasty, but I can tell you it's fake.
Oh my goodness. I don't know that I would want that special skill.
No, I don't. That was a late in life thing that started
Mm.
several years ago.
Oh goodness. Oh goodness. Well, and yes, I would agree. And here again, I'm just going to repeat ad nauseum, sleep. If we're not getting proper sleep, how does that adversely affect our ability to detoxify and improve, and therefore improve our metabolism and then therefore improve our sex hormones?
Yeah. So sleep, I like to think of sleep not only as recovery time, because again, your body is constantly dealing with stress throughout the day. Sleep is our ability and time to recover. But I also think of it, especially like we look at liver qi experience in Chinese medicine. This is when the janitor service shows up. And it
Mm-hmm.
only shows up if you're sleeping and you haven't eaten for several hours. So
Mm-hmm.
you have to go to bed, get the sleep, and stay asleep in order for the janitors to get everything to the liver so they can package it and get it to the dumpster by morning. And across the board, it doesn't matter what disease state you're looking at, sleep is a significant portion of your protection. And we can't do the game, I'll sleep when I'm dead. I was definitely one of those people that I was like, I don't think I need that
Well,
much. And
you can, but you'll be dead sooner.
actually, sleep
You will
apnea.
lose that game.
Yeah, sleep apnea shortens your life more than smoking. So you could either get a pack of Marlboros or you can fix your sleep apnea.
Wow.
It's a serious, yeah, it's a serious issue. And I think a lot of people struggle with it and don't really know how to fix it.
Mm.
But we got to put some effort into really dialing sleep in because you
Yeah.
need to recover.
Yeah. In the Chinese medicine clock, the liver energies begin to work at 11. That's the first janitor, right? The big janitor comes in at 11. So you would want to be in bed by 10, so asleep by 10:30 so the janitor can come on board. I love the janitorial service analogy. Thank you for that. I'm going to borrow that for sure. And then of course, as you say, you want to have finished your meal a few hours before that. And when you think about it, this is how we grew up eating, right? We've had finished our meal, our dinner meal, in that sort of 6 to 7 o'clock hour. So we had this time to begin our metabolism before we went to sleep. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, yeah, especially people in our generation, we ate by 5, 6 o'clock. But today, in the last 30 years, people are working later. They're getting, well, we don't have somebody out. So I'm going to be offensive probably to somebody here, but we could all use, I'm going to call it rent a wife. And I'm putting air
Mhm.
quotes around that if people are
Mhm.
listening to this. We all need somebody that's coming in and like ideally prepping the dinner and doing all this other stuff because we are usually two adults working in the home. And now we got to figure out how to navigate taking care of ourselves when we're often not getting home until 6:30.
Mhm.
And the
And
later we
that's not the
eat,
time to start prepping a meal. So yeah.
yeah. And our pancreatic function, our ability to digest our foods is cut in half, if not more, by about 7, 8 o'clock at night. So you can't even
Ah.
digest that well.
Interesting, interesting. So when we're getting home at 6:30, beginning to prep our meal, sitting down to eat at 8 o'clock, having a glass of wine with that meal, just you can just think about it. The load is just getting higher, and it really is. You're going to bed with a toxic dump on your shoulders.
Yep. And most
Yeah.
people get a second wind. If you make it to 10:30, almost everybody will say, "Hey, I get sleepy by about 10. But if I can
Mhm.
make it to 10:30, I'm fine." I'm like, "No, you just got the second wind and the liver."
Right. And that second wind is adrenaline kicking in and cortisol kicking in because it's saying, okay, then I guess the saber-toothed tiger is going to be with us a little bit longer. Tell us your thoughts, and I think I have a pretty good idea about sleep hygiene, the blue lights, when to turn off devices, dark room, cool temperature, and so forth.
Yeah. So, and so especially in the age group I predominantly work with, this becomes even more important because it becomes even a bigger problem as you go through menopause. But you got to look at sleep as how our ancestors prepared for sleep. They got up when the sun came up, and when the sun went down, they would start a fire, but they would only stay awake long enough for whatever they needed to do that you could do by campfire. And the campfire was an amber glow.
Mm-hmm.
And so we want to mimic that same experience and get up with the sun and have early sunlight exposure because that actually turns on the clock to tell your body when you go to sleep. And then we want to start winding down at night. My recommendation is get off the phone by 8. Get
Perfect.
off the tablets, the iPads, the other things. I wear a particular brand called Viva Ray
The
amber
blue light
glass.
blockers.
They're blue
Mm-hmm.
light blockers, but they actually have progressive blockers throughout the day. So
Mm-hmm.
over the daytime, you add progressive amber exposure and
Mm-hmm.
green and blue exposure, which tells your brain, hey, go make melatonin, which is a signal to go to sleep.
Yes.
And
And an
the
antioxidant. It's also beginning the detox process. Mm-hmm.
huge
These glasses, I'm curious, are they different pairs you're putting on?
so it's actually what I love about them is they have one called the 3-in-1.
Uh-huh.
And
It
so essentially,
transitions.
yeah, they have sort of a transition. So it's a light amber and then they're magnetic. So then they have just a clip and it just goes on the front. You can't tell. They're cute.
Mm-hmm.
If anybody's worried
Mm-hmm.
about cute, that get darker and then another one that gets darker. So
I love
as the
this.
night goes on, it gets darker, but you can feel it. When you put on a truly amber blue blocking glass, you can feel your entire brain just go downshift.
Exactly.
It has a relaxation thing. And like for me, I need to read before bed. I need to
Mm-hmm.
have a ritual. So a lot of people, it might be taking a bath to drop your core body temperature. Actually, getting into a warm bath drops your internal core temperature, which helps
Mm-hmm.
you get to sleep. Doing some stretches, some yoga, things like that can help prepare you for sleep. I always have to put on socks. My feet need to be warm so my core body temperature cools
Mm-hmm.
off. And then
Mm-hmm.
I read a few things, just a few pages, and it can't be anything that I'm super interested in. I'm not going to read a thriller because then I'll get
Mm-hmm.
into the story. And that just helps me do the transition. And then I think it's really important to have a pitch black room,
Yeah.
very dark, very cool,
Yeah.
right? To keep your core body temperature as you can stay asleep.
Yeah.
All of those things are important.
Yeah. I have a red nightlight master so that if I have to get up, I'm not flipping on any lights because as soon as you flip on that light, your body is saying, okay, it's high noon. Let's raise cortisol. Let's get busy. And then it's impossible for me to get back to sleep if there's any light making its way
Absolutely.
through. Yeah.
Yep, I've got amber lights in both of our end tables. So if you come
Mhm.
into my bedroom and I flip
It,
those on,
uh,
it's always
I
amber.
from the outside, I've got red lights from the outside of my house. It looks like a bit like there might be a brothel going on
Yes,
inside.
100%. You and me both.
That's very funny. Well, I know that I could just glean from you for hours upon hours. And Betty is such a wealth of information, and her website and resources will be in the show notes. But before we wrap up, because in the interest of your time and the interest of the listeners' time, is there anything we did not touch upon that you would say, oh, this would be a big miss if we don't cover this?
I think I want to just do a few seconds on the microbiome
Please.
because we
Yes,
mentioned it
yes,
and we
yes.
tangentially went around it. So, the important thing to understand is that our microbes in our gut, the 4 pounds of bacteria, and we have trillions upon trillions of cells of bacteria that outnumber human cells.
Mm-hmm.
They truly, honestly have control of our body. And we just barely understand that.
Mm-hmm.
And the health of your microbiome, think of it as a jungle. And I want a lot of animals, a lot of variety. And I don't want to overgrow snakes and cockroaches without any woodland creatures.
Mm-hmm.
So antibiotic use, factory farming, not eating organic, all these things, antibiotics as kids, all of those things make an impact. And they truly are going to have an impact on how many estrogens get recirculated, either real or half detoxified. They're going to make a difference on how you actually manage your metabolism.
Mm-hmm.
They need the fiber in your diet to survive, but they also produce things like GLP-1, which everybody's talking about, like Ozempic. And
Mm-hmm.
they produce signaling molecules that we barely understand.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to protect your gut. You got to protect your gut and feed them personally, and I would bet you're probably the same as I am, probiotics, I'll use them strategically, but I much rather have people eat fermented foods unless they have a
Absolutely.
histamine problem or something that would keep them from doing it, but they're getting the prebiotic the bacteria itself as a probiotic, and they're also getting the end product, which is what we would call a postbiotic when they eat fermented foods, just a little bit at every meal, right? Or at least a couple meals a day. I think that has a huge impact on health.
Absolutely, absolutely. There was something I was just it came and went, which is probably a sign that I need to be better about my diet today, because my brain just went, well, there was something about that, the microbiome, and boy, I lost my train of thought because it was really it was an important thing for a second. Anyway, I guess I'm going to let it go, and then maybe it will come back and we can resume our episode here. But yes, so our microbiome is incredible and incredibly important. And I know what I was going to say. I was going to comment on the probiotic. I will use probiotic if someone has been on antibiotic, and oftentimes with the IVF protocols, an antibiotic is part of it to make sure there's no infection taking place while they're trying to do retrievals and transfers and so forth. And that's a person for whom I'll say, okay, let's quickly get some probiotic back into you. And then if a person is having trouble during early pregnancy with morning sickness and so forth, and is therefore not eating very well, I'll use a probiotic as part of that sort of prenatal protocol. But otherwise, I use the fibers of your vegetables as your prebiotic, so that your biota, your bugs, can get fed the right food, and then the fungus and the sort of the bad bacteria aren't overpopulating as a result.
Absolutely, because they do. I think 20 years from now, we'll be almost exclusively looking at the biochemistry produced by the microbiome and looking at the impact in human health, but we just aren't there yet.
But if anybody's going to be on there, it'll be Betty Murray, because she's cutting edge. She's a researcher. She really likes to know what's coming down the pike. Betty, thank you so very much for your time today. I would love to have you back to continue the conversation, because I think there's so much more that we just touched on the surface, as is often the case. But I think there's so much more you could share with the listening audience. So thank you very much for your time. And listeners, thank you for your time. And we're going to conclude this episode of Health University. And as we do at the end of all of our episodes, we end it with class dismissed.